Well, that episode of Moon Knight, that's freaking nuts! What is up, people of the MCU? Welcome back to a brand new Moon Knight Episode 5 recap, review, and breakdown. The penultimate episode, and a crazy episode, no pun intended there. It really was. So many aspects of this episode intrigued me. Whether you're one of the fans who isn't fully on board with Moon Knight, whether you love it or whatever you feel about it, one thing that can be said about this show is that there are some great aspects that I thoroughly enjoy, and one of them, and is very much so highlighted in this episode, is Oscar Isaac's performance. I feel like it definitely tugged on a lot of our heartstrings going down the trip of memory lane, if you will, with regards to somewhat a bit of the origin of Moon Knight. Not only in what we predicted to see in this episode, like a lot of us was talking in the last video I did last week in episode 4's review, that we're probably going to see the Khonshu thing this episode. A lot of us thought we would see a bit more of Jake Lockley, and more on that in a minute. But it really is just like what they're doing, and as I always say, it's not copy and paste from the comics, but just like the whole psychiatric ward thing from the comics being adapted here, with the whole Armmit to Arthur thing in the comics, but really this being a bit more, you know, loosely translated. But with Randall, his brother, and what was going on there, and Stephen learning that along the way, it was just a really fascinating episode to watch unfold. I'm gonna stop wasting time. Let's get into this review, recap, and breakdown. Like this video if you do go on to enjoy it. I'd really appreciate that. It helps spread my Marvel videos out there a little bit more, and subscribe maybe if you've been enjoying them, and of course for more Marvel videos in the future. Now, this episode picked up with a little bit of a foreshadowing of what was to come. Of course, we heard the younger version of Marc cry out for help, and the mother saying this is all your fault. From the get-go, you already kind of know what you're in for with that. Sure, you don't know every little thing that's coming in this episode, but you know we're going to get into some dark corners. And considering a lot of this show surrounds Marc's DID, you know we were going to get into the thick of it. So I knew this was going to be a very deep and thoroughly explored episode in the psyche of Marc Spector, and if that wasn't already obvious through being in this kind of dreamscapey psyche kind of ward place, albeit that it kind of isn't even a dreamscape if you think about it. He is dead, and they're going through the land between lands, if you will, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But there's some other interesting aspects of this episode that, sure, we predicted a bit that maybe this episode would be going down not only memory lane, but with regards to Moon Knight's origin, with how Marc Spector was dying, a little bit of a Bushman reference there as well, but in how Khonshu offered him the chance to be Moon Knight. But there's some other things we've been talking about, and that is touching on Jake Lockley now. And Jake Lockley, I think a lot of us were saying last week, and I've been even saying, yeah, I reckon we're going to see him come out of the sarcophagus that he was trying to, like, you know, rummage his way out of. We've got Tarawet as well, the good old hippo, maybe facilitating that escape as well. There was all kinds of theories up in the air. But seemingly, you know, at face value, if you will, we still haven't had the unveiling. So it does feel as though, to me, that we're not going to get the, if you will, kind of grand reveal of Jake Lockley. And what I mean by that is him being revealed to, hey, not only is there Stephen and Marc, but there is a third one, because they are not really fully aware of that, because as we know, when Marc pulled out that machete, he was like, Stephen, what did you do? I didn't do it. No, what did you do? Kind of thing. Neither of them seem to be aware of Jake Lockley. However, if you are aware of another thing, another theory, if you will, we have likely seen him in the series so far, in such a subtle way that it's very intentional to make you question if it is Marc Spector or Jake Lockley. For example, when we first saw Layla come across Marc Spector in Egypt as he was looking for a tip for the sarcophagus to make that star map, that was a bit of a Chicago accent going on there. And believe it or not, there's been a couple of other times as well, but to get to this episode, some people like saying, oh yeah, maybe we're going to see Jake Lockley in the finale, that's going to maybe even be how it ends, or just something like that. I'm not disagreeing there with regards to the actual reveal, but I do feel like we saw him in this episode. So just skipping past the beginning bit where Marc and Stephen are still screaming, we then go back into the room with Arthur Harrow, and I like all the playful stuff on, like, the, you know, the pendulum of the different aspects of the mind. That's a play on the scales, literally the scales that he freaking waves between people's hands and then drains the life out of them, freaking Palpatine style. But interestingly, in this moment, and if you don't believe me, fair enough, I could be wrong, but this is one of those things where I do think, again, the whole Jake Lockley thing being very slightly ever so present, and actually having taken over as a personality, albeit in a subtle change of a slight more Chicago accent than that of Marc's, the demeanor is sometimes often the same, that it's meant to make you think and debate between the audience, oh yeah, now that was Marc, what are you on about? As it wasn't Jake, but what if it was Jake? Now, in this moment, we have that moment where Arthur Harrow says you're doing anything and everything possible not to look within. And then they're like, hippopotamus, sense or nonsense? And this is where I believe Jake comes out. Now, I do recommend playing back the clip now, just so you can see exactly what I'm on about. That moment where, like, we get back to the kind of broken-y nose-looking version of Marc, if you will. In this moment, the personality somewhat shifts. Sure, you could say, hey, no, that was Marc just freaking out again. But he said in this moment, like, no, I feel great. You know, there's a lot of money in this place. You know, I feel like $1 million. And granted, that's a terrible impression of mine. It was very distinctly different, but so much so that if you don't pay mega attention to this theory of how there have been slips and cracks of where Jake was actually already there. But again, if you're a very general consumer, just kind of chilling back, watching Moon Knight, saying, oh yeah, did you get the chips out the oven? You're just not gonna, you know, you're not going to really realize these things all the time. And I do think that will be something that is, whether they confirm it or not, it's definitely something intentional. So yes, Jake hasn't been officially revealed in terms of to the other personalities. There haven't been that, like, it's been spoken on screen. But there was another moment, in this moment that I'm talking about, and that you're seeing on screen, where I personally believe that Jake came out. Again, you may be like, well, how do you know about the hippopotamus and stuff? Well, there are theories as well behind Jake and how not only can he take over, or is maybe the only personality to take over whenever he wants over Marc or Steven, as seen in prior episodes. Again, it's kind of needless to bring up the moment of the machete and how Steven was blaming Marc and vice versa about the violence of those kills. But in this moment as well, he got pretty violent, which is kind of what we've seen as per what I just mentioned with that previous violence scene with what would have been Jake, very obviously so, with the machete. He grabbed that little sharp kind of glass desk object and he was kind of getting ready to use it. And either way, I'm going to end this theory part here. It's just, I know there's going to be a lot of people who don't believe me. There might be a few who do. I'll hold my hands up if I'm wrong. But that whole theory of Jake Lockley subtly coming out and not everyone always being able to differentiate, it kind of, if you blink, you miss it, because, again, the Marc personality to Jake Lockley isn't, I guess, absolute polar opposite, to an extent of, like, Steven with Marc. You know, it's more American accent to American accent kind of thing, you know, similar demeanor. You get what I'm trying to say, and in this moment, I do believe that was good old Jakey boy, albeit next episode, in episode 6, we'll probably get that actually officially revealed to the other two personalities. Now, around about this time, we had Steven geeking out because we had him learn that this is indeed Tarawet, the goddess of women and children, and that she's guiding them through their journey in the afterlife. She did detail some things that, like, and there was like a reference to the ancestral plane as well, and how there's kind of all kinds of different planes and representations of afterlives. I like how that kind of all intersects there as well, because at many different points in time, there's many different cultures, beliefs of afterlives, and technically they can all exist and people can go to those different aspects. I guess she was somewhat getting at, hence the ancestral plane, but hence the also field of reeds that they're currently heading towards on the boat. But the one thing did kind of confuse me, because she did say that the duat's true nature is impossible for the human mind to comprehend, and you may perceive this realm as something more easily recognizable to you, which is, you know, a psych ward for them. But then they just kind of go outside and kind of see the sands of the duat and the boat, and, you know, eventually the gates and stuff like that. So unless I'm being an idiot here, I don't really get it. Like, aren't they comprehending, like, the true nature out there? Because they're literally sailing through the sands of the duat. So I don't know, maybe I'm just being an idiot, but it's a bit of a nitpick there, I suppose. In this moment, you kind of know what you're in for, especially when she takes the hearts out, puts them on the scales of justice, and, you know, to Egyptian beliefs and stuff, you need them to balance with the feather of truth, and they're kind of unbalanced. Now, you're probably thinking around this time, or at least I was, is that because the multiple personalities? Is it because Jake Lockley as well is unaccounted for? But also then, they made it very transparent that there are truths that are being hidden from Marc to that of Steven. And this is where the heartbreaking journey unfolded in the episode. There's a bit of resistance from Steven that I felt was played very, very well from Oscar Isaac, and you had the protective aspect from Marc Spector here. All of this stuff I was thoroughly engrossed in. And we even had a bit of a foreshadowing to the death if you will, of Steven from Turowitz saying that, you know, if they don't balance, you get thrown overboard and the dead will drag you down into the Duat, where you will remain forever frozen in sand. Now, we'll get onto that moment a little bit later, because my boy Steven, I'll jump into the screen myself if I have to get him back. I'm not letting him stay there. Initially, we see all of the people that Marc Spector has killed as Moon Knight, and this is explained that they are the worst of the worst, murderers, you know, predators and everything like that. It's basically exacting Khonshu's punishment, and in this moment it's signifying that, oh, the scales are starting to balance, you know, okay, well, what's going on here? You know, we're gonna have to continue this, but the more you have to go deep, the more Marc didn't want the truth to truly get out. And again, just, you know, I'm not saying this is like the peak of mental health representation, but I feel like with some of the performance from Oscar Isaac and some of the things they wrote in there, it really just was quite raw, you know, in certain aspects, especially as you go further and further and further along. And this is where things got really feelsy. So we saw them having a little bit of a family barbecue. Marc says to his younger brother Randall that he's just not really hungry. Do you want to go to the cave? Steven this whole time is learning this. You know, Steven, as he reveals later, that he feels like he was the original, and that's not something that the audience didn't know. We always knew that Steven thought like, hey, Marc, you're the one, who are you, you know, since we even started the show off with Steven, which is a decision I like, because if you know anything about Moon Knight, you know that Marc Spector is, you know, the guy, and Steven is one of the personalities, and in this show they started off with Steven, so, and from here you start to piece it all together, and even the representation of the bedroom to like the callbacks, like later skaters to his mother, and it's just like I'm not getting teary now, but just those moments we're about to get to. You could see how the little goldfish thing comes in with one fin, and how you can even see how the other personalities, whether you believe that Jake replaced the goldfish or whether it was Marc, even though it's probably more likely Marc in that instance, because Marc has been the one, like I've been saying since episode 1, it always came across like he was trying to protect Steven, and that's why he was keeping those things up, like even the postcards from his mother and things like that. And you have little innocent Steven, which is kind of breaking my heart along the way, even as what is happening to the boys is happening. The water is rising too fast in the caves, and, you know, he's just kind of learning all of this as it's going along, his own kind of origin of, you know, conceptualizing this personality. We get to the point of where Randall, unfortunately, passed away, and we get the very, I don't know how to even describe this mother who really blames her son, can't deal with the pain herself. She gets into drinking, and it's just this man, I just can't even articulate, because the more you really think about it, the more it's just you can't almost put it into words. I don't want to like get over dramatic here, but you know, like this kind of stuff happens in real life, and you know what is being depicted on screen here with this character. It's just so sad to see, and to see how it affected Marc Spector as he grew up. The guilt he carried, this was explored through the father still being present, but the mother not bothering with any of the birthdays. She kept getting heavier and heavier into drinking, and her own mental decline. We get moments in the episode where Marc just kind of like pulls Steven out. He just doesn't want to go back to that, and I thought this was, you know, it speaks to what we even saw later of the Marc who kind of did turn up outside and who couldn't even go in. And this was only a couple of months ago. So to like revisit that again, and that was so pivotal, the 2 months ago thing, because that kind of trauma of his mother's death, and, you know, obviously that bringing everything back is the very thing that kind of brought Steven and, you know, Marc Spector's personalities going back and forth more than they ever have before to really start kicking into gear. So it's not saying that he didn't turn into Steven or like DID back like what we saw when he was a young boy in the bedroom. It's just, I wouldn't say maybe Steven was dormant up until that point 2 months ago. I'm sure he came out every now and again, but it was no way near what it's been like for the past 2 months, where Steven just keeps coming out like way more frequent than ever, and that was kind of kicked off from the events of his mother's death. Like, ever since that moment, Steven has come out more so than he ever has before, to the point of where maybe he was quite dormant, and Marc was, you know, more in control of his mental DID, you know, slipping out. So, you know, even when he was in the army and stuff like that, Stephen probably didn't come out as much, or even maybe not at all, who knows, even though he did say, it turns out, like, I think when he went in a fugue state or whatever. But either way, getting back on point, Mother's death is what really kicked off Stephen coming back, and even to the point of working at the museum, because he was coming out so much. Even though we've briefly spoke about the Khonshu origin right towards the beginning of this episode, I want to briefly bring it up again just to say that now that Stephen has kind of literally seen like the dreamscapey version of how Marc said, like, literally, I tried to get them out, but they all got killed. Like, I tried to help them escape. Even though I'm kind of jumping to, this would mean and would have to mean that Stephen is okay, but Layla learns the truth that Marc is telling the truth. You know, he did everything he freaking could, and he even basically was bleeding out himself in an effort to save them. So, you know, with Stephen now knowing that, that could be the key to Layla realizing, through Stephen saying, look, I've seen it myself, like, or I know this for a fact, Marc did try everything he could. It wasn't his fault. But that all depends on if our Stephen gets out the sand. Now, this is where shit is kicking off in the real world, though, because Torowet realizes, well, everyone does, that freaking souls, unready souls, or should I say unbalanced souls, are being judged or condemned to the sands before their time, and she's like, oh, bad. This is bad. This is evil. And this is where I'm wondering how are all these things got to fall into place, because I don't know if I would say it's convenient yet, because we don't know how things are happening, but as she said, like, if I send you up, even if I could, you'd be going back to a body with a bullet in it. So she's like, can you send a message to Layla, kind of, you know, we need to free Khonshu, and that's where they talk about, do you really want to go back to Khonshu? But the thing is, it's just like, this is riding on a lot, like, one person, Layla, in the real world to be able to free Khonshu in literally the Pyramid of Giza where he's chilling, and that's like the chill pad place of, you know, the existing Egyptian gods. Like, a lot is riding on Marc and Stephen, well, should I say Marc for now, because good old Stephen's frozen, returning just through all of this panning out in the real world so that then they can then stop Arthur Harrow. I don't know. I hope that it goes smoothly and not so contrived, but sometimes things like that happen to kind of happen, because otherwise they just won't happen, if you even get what I'm saying right now. But yeah, like, their only shot is for someone like Layla to free Khonshu from that statue, and she's gonna have to break in. But maybe next episode, for a portion, we're gonna see that happen, where we're gonna have to, because who else is gonna free Khonshu? But this is one of the most sad moments of the episode, and it's kind of what we've touched on already. And in this moment, interestingly, they played it when we went back to Arthur Harrow, where we kind of got that acceptance from Marc to let Stephen in. It's like, you know, Dr. Arthur Harrow is really somewhat helping, if anything, because that's where we're teleported into that room, if you will. The mother is bashing on the door, and it just gets nasty. Very, very nasty, and you see Stephen come out for the first time. Again, I don't really need to articulate how sad this was to see. It was sad for Stephen, because obviously he realizes that he was made up, as he says. And then, of course, we had that moment where he was in the street. We finally realized what that moment in the street was, and even though we've already said and spoken about how this was the moment where Stephen started coming out a lot more regularly, I just felt so bad. That Oscar Isaac's acting in this moment where he dropped to his knees was just heart-wrenching. And it was also important for Stephen to come to grips to this as well, because he realized that his mother is gone. And it was kind of beautiful in a way in how Stephen was consoling Marc for saying that it wasn't his fault, he was just a child, because at the same time, this is just, you know, you saying that to you, you know, Marc saying it, even though Stephen is a different personality, but ultimately they are the same person in a way. It's finally him coming to some form of, I don't know if I want to call it acceptance, but some kind of catharsis with that whole, you know, trauma. Now, this was the ending part, and I was like, God damn it, because the scale's still unbalanced. The gates of Osiris are right there. They're kind of ready to go. And this is what I mean by, like, the contrived aspects, maybe, that I hope doesn't happen, because they're almost at the gates. So it's almost like, well, I guess you better hope that Layla's made Khonshu free, because let's just say the scales do balance, which they kind of did. It's just kind of like, well, are you going to be returning to a dead body, or I don't know, like, what's going on there? But either way, this is where the Sand People, well, not really the Sand People, but the unbalanced souls begin to start, you know, trying to take Marc and Stephen. They knew how to kick our heart in this moment, because they deliberately made Stephen get his courage and try and help Marc physically again. So he got the bat, he was going to bat literally for him. And there was that moment where, I don't think it was him like diving overboard deliberately. I think that unbalanced soul grabbed him and chucked him over and he fell with him. And that moment, the kind of imagery of that where he just kind of reaches out to himself and he freezes in that position, it was kind of horrifying and sad at the same time, because it was more like the way I think Oscar Isaac acted it. It's like he was not able to breathe as it was happening to him as he reached out. And that was just, again, with, I think, the context and what we were just following all episode long, following it and learning it as Steven learned it, for him to only end up as the guy in the freaking sand, it's like, damn you for doing that, you know. And I think we all felt like how Marc felt, screaming Steven. Again, what made me kind of sad though was like, you have to assume that Steven's gonna get out somehow, but we've only got one episode left. And I'm not saying that Steven's dead, or that he won't come back, but I'm just thinking like, damn, you're doing that in the penultimate episode? How are you gonna get him back? And what is the big deal about the Field of Reeds? That looks like a boring-ass Afterlife, I'm sorry, but I mean, it looks pretty, but it's just like, you look around everywhere and it's just like, okay, what are you meant to do? Just sit there and just be like, okay, I feel the fields. The fields feel good. The breeze is good. But other than, like, what? You have to think that Marc isn't going to let Steven stay there. I don't know how he would unfreeze him at the same time. I think it would be powerfully tragic, though, if you know, we're going to get more Moon Knight in the future, potentially, if that is actually benched for some time. But I just don't know, man. I don't know if they're really gonna let Steven stay frozen that long. But how do you unfreeze him, you know? Well, you can't go to the sands and just scoop him up. I think that's gonna have to take some intervention from Khonshu or some kind of godly figure, right? He's gonna have to have some other help to get Steven there. So theories, fire them down in the comments below, but to stop rambling even more, that's more or less the episode. A very powerful one. Let me know what you think about the Jake Lockley theory at the beginning. I do think that was him. Like, again, I don't want to... I'm usually cautious with theories like that, but I do think if they're doing the whole thing with, by the way, you know, if the showrunner comes out and says, you've actually seen Jake Lockley speak more than what you think, that would probably be one of those moments. You may have seen him already kind of thing, even though you haven't have him formally revealed to the characters. But again, I don't need to repeat all that from earlier. And yeah, let me know what your predictions for the finale. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you know, we've got some footage of Arthur Harrow, you know, fighting Moon Knight. I feel like that's because Arthur's going to be, you know, juiced up for the avatar of Armmit, so he's going to be very powerful. So it's going to be quite a cool action sequence there, I'm sure. So prepare yourself for some hopefully awesome looking CGI Moon Knight battles with Armmit. Again, I don't know how to think of the escape and saving of Steven, if you will, and what's going to happen there. Is there going to be some repercussions with all of this? Because is it really just going to end with, oh, you know, Arthur Harrow defeated, Armmit prevented in terms of what her grand plan was, Steven recovered, and like we're just chilling now? I don't know. I don't know if it's just going to end that simply. I really don't know. Either way though, everyone, I've been going on for long enough as it is, so I'd really appreciate a like, especially if you got this far. Please hit that like button. Maybe share this with some of your friends. That would also really help my videos out. If you want to follow me a bit further, as always, links are in the description down below. Check out some of my recent videos as well. But thank you so much for watching. Looking forward to talking about the finale next week, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.